Barbra Streisand built an empire by refusing to be edited. She kept the face Hollywood questioned, challenged the arrangements, the camera, and the rules, until an industry that once doubted her learned to work on her terms. She created a public world shaped by precision, authorship, and control. Yet control has a limit. A live moment cannot be revised. Fear cannot be ordered. Time refuses every contract. When a perfectionist steps back, silence may look like peace from the outside while becoming a fortress within. How does a woman who spent 6 decades deciding how the world would see her endure the parts of life that refuse direction? Leave a like for Barbra Streisand and stay for the price behind the control. The instinct to resist being edited took shape in Brooklyn, inside a family where absence, money, and emotional restraint taught Barbra Streisand that being heard could never be left entirely to chance. Barbra Jones Streisand was born on April 24, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York, into a Jewish household that carried both intellect and worry. Her father, Emanuel Streisand, was a respected teacher and scholar. Her mother, Diana, possessed a singing voice of her own, though survival had a way of narrowing the room available for dreams when rent came due. For a brief time, there was the outline of an ordinary home: books, music, a young mother, a father with promise, and a baby too small to understand that security can disappear without warning. Emanuel died when Barbra was only 15 months old. That kind of loss leaves no complete memory to revisit. It leaves a shape. She could not recall the sound of her father's voice or the feeling of being recognized by him across a room. What remained were photographs, family stories, and the knowledge that someone central to her beginning had vanished before she could know him. No father waiting in a doorway, no familiar hand on her shoulder before a school performance, no private conversation to remember later when the world became loud. Barbra grew up without conscious memories of Manuel, yet the space he should have occupied remained part of the emotional architecture of the household. A child cannot miss a conversation she remembers having, but she can still feel the absence of the person who was supposed to answer. Brooklyn in the 1940s offered little softness to a young widow. Diana worked, remarried, and carried her own disappointments while trying to keep the family moving. She was not always the warm, reassuring mother Barbra seemed to want. The home held fatigue, limited money, strong personalities, and a little girl whose hunger to be noticed often met adults already burdened by their own survival. Picture Barbra testing her voice in a bathroom where the tile returned the sound larger than the body producing it. Outside, Brooklyn continued through trains, neighboring apartments, workdays, arguments, and people with little time to stop for another child's dream. Inside that small space, sound could expand. She could hear herself clearly. She could send a note outward and receive something back, even if the answer came only as an echo. Barbra did not begin with glamour. She began with a father gone beyond memory, a mother whose love arrived through strain rather than constant tenderness, and a stubborn need to make her presence undeniable. A stage could never replace a parent, and applause could never completely fill an absence formed before language. Still, the voice gave her something the silence had not: a way to occupy space without asking permission. That voice would carry her beyond Brooklyn and into a city that had not yet decided whether to laugh at her, dismiss her, or stop breathing when she sang. The voice gave Barbra an instrument. Ambition gave it direction. By the late 1950s, she was a teenager with desires far larger than the apartment and expectations surrounding her. Singing alone was never enough. She wanted to act. She wanted Broadway. She wanted movies. She wanted the camera to study her face and discover something worth preserving rather than something that needed correction. The entertainment world of that era offered young women a narrow set of acceptable forms: soft beauty, careful manners, polished smiles, and faces that already resembled finished advertisements. Barbra did not resemble that poster. She had a striking profile, a Brooklyn accent, a quick comic mind, and a presence that lost its force whenever anyone tried to make it smaller. People commented on her nose. They questioned whether she could ever become a leading lady. Some believed she should change herself, smooth the edges, soften the face, and make the voice less unusual. Barbra recognized that the features they wanted to reduce were the same features that made her impossible to confuse with anyone else. Altering herself might have made her easier to package, but it also risked making her easier to forget. She refused to disappear into another person's definition of beauty and began working in the small rooms available to her. Nightclubs, auditions, modest stages, and spaces where the lighting was limited, the money uncertain, and the audience not always prepared to listen. Smoke might hang in the air, glasses might continue clinking, conversations might continue while a young woman waited for the opening note to claim the room. Then she sang. The change was immediate. Not polite, complete. Barbra could make a song feel as though the emotion had reached her only minutes earlier and had not yet settled into something safe. Humor, strangeness, longing, anger, and authority could live inside the same phrase. She did not sound manufactured for approval. She sounded necessary. The discipline underneath that effect mattered. A song had to be arranged, interpreted, paced, and inhabited. Every pause carried intention. Every lyric needed a point of view. The apparent spontaneity came from a young performer already studying how to control attention without flattening the emotion that created it. She changed her name as well, dropping one letter from Barbra to become Barbra. The alteration was small, but the gesture carried the same refusal that would shape her later career. The world might publicize her, photograph her, judge her, and profit from her, but it would not complete the final edit without resistance. In 1962, at 20, she appeared on Broadway in I Can Get It For You Wholesale. She was not the lead, yet night after night she made herself difficult to overlook. That same year, she signed with Columbia Records. By 1963, her debut album had announced that a different kind of American star had arrived. Not the girl next door, not the studio doll, not a beauty queen standing politely beside a microphone, but a young woman whose voice made difference sound like destiny. Success brought opportunity, but it offered little safety. The people who had questioned her appearance could now study her more closely. Every ovation carried judgment beside admiration. Every new room raised the stakes of the next one. Then, Broadway placed in front of her a role that gathered ambition, comedy, loneliness, pride, and the refusal to become convenient inside one woman. Barbra stepped toward Fanny Brice with the force of someone who had already spent years preparing to defend her right to be seen. The show was Funny Girl, and the scale of her life would never be small again. In 1964, Barbra Streisand opened on Broadway in Funny Girl, and the match between performer and role felt almost dangerous in its precision. Fanny Brice was funny, ambitious, unconventional, wounded, and impossible to ignore. She did not wait quietly to be selected. She entered the room through talent, wit, persistence, and a refusal to apologize for the force of her own personality. Barbra understood that woman, because she had already spent years defending many of the same qualities in herself. When she sang People, audiences heard more than a Broadway standard. They heard loneliness exposed beneath the spotlight. They heard a woman asking for love without agreeing to become smaller first. The song gave vulnerability the scale of an anthem, and Barbra's voice carried it beyond the theater into American homes, record collections, television specials, and private memories. For older audiences, she did not arrive through a phone screen or an algorithm. She entered through vinyl turning in living rooms, radios playing during long drives, television sets shared by entire families, and movie houses where the lights lowered slowly enough for anticipation to gather. Her songs attached themselves to first dates, difficult marriages, lost loves, empty kitchens after midnight, and the faces of people who would later exist only in memory. The 1968 film version of Funny Girl carried that voice and presence onto the screen with enough force to make Barbra a movie star. At 26, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, sharing the historic tie with Katharine Hepburn, one of the defining figures of classic Hollywood. The symbolism was difficult to miss. Established Hollywood traditions standing beside a woman whose face, voice, humor, and authority had once been treated as obstacles. On Oscar night, Barbra looked at the statuette and repeated the famous line from the film, "Hello, gorgeous." The moment sounded playful, but it also held years of resistance. For every person who had told her she did not resemble a star, the Oscar became more than professional recognition. It became evidence that the standard itself had been too narrow. Yet victory carried its own pressure. The more the world adored Barbra, the less room it allowed her to remain ordinary, uncertain, or privately exhausted. The industry wanted the voice, the glamour, the romance, and the legend. It was less comfortable with the woman who questioned lighting, challenged arrangements, studied camera angles, examined contracts, and insisted on authority over how her work would be presented. The label "difficult" often appeared when Barbra refused to surrender decisions that male stars and filmmakers were expected to care about. Funny Girl gave her the crown, but it also revealed the cost of becoming a symbol. Fame opened doors while allowing strangers to believe they belonged inside every private room beyond them. The young woman who had fought to make the camera recognize her now faced a different problem. The camera no longer wanted to look away. At the same time, her first marriage was absorbing the pressure of a career accelerating faster than two young people could easily contain. Public triumph and private strain began occupying the same years. America had found its newest phenomenon. Barbra was learning that being seen by everyone could make it harder to remain fully known by the people closest to her. Before the avalanche, there was Elliot Gould. Barbra met him in the world of New York theater, when she was still a young performer walking into auditions with more certainty about her talent than about how the world would receive her. Elliot was intelligent, unconventional, and close enough to those early years to know the woman before the name became an international event. They married in 1963 when Barbra was 21, and for a time their lives moved forward together through rehearsal rooms, opening nights, ambition, and the private hope that two artists could rise without losing sight of each other. Then, the scale changed. Funny Girl placed Barbra at the center of Broadway. Records, television appearances, film offers, photographers, and constant scrutiny followed. On December 29, 1966, at 24, she gave birth to their son, Jason. Motherhood arrived while her career was becoming almost impossible to contain, and the expectations surrounding her were merciless. She was supposed to remain brilliant before an audience, emotionally available at home, commercially dependable, physically composed, and grateful for every demand placed upon her. Elliot had a career and identity of his own, yet the world increasingly described him through the woman beside him. Years later, he said that they had not grown together as Barbra became larger in the public imagination. They separated in 1969 and divorced in 1971, though neither their son nor the years they had shared disappeared with the marriage. Their story needs no invented villain. It was the painful meeting of young love, unequal visibility, changing ambitions, and a form of fame that entered every room before the people inside it had learned how to protect themselves from its weight. Barbra emerged as a mother whose first attempt to build a lasting home had ended, while the public continued to demand more of the performer it had crowned. Work became movement, responsibility, and a place where uncertainty could be shaped into a song or a scene. Yet even there, control was beginning to fail her. Long before the marriage formally ended, on a summer evening in Central Park, Barbra stood before more people than most performers would ever face at once and discovered that the stage could expose fear as powerfully as it displayed talent. On June 17, 1967, Barbra Streisand entered Central Park before an audience commonly estimated at roughly 125,000 people. She was 25. The concert was recorded for television, and the scale of the evening seemed to confirm everything America believed about her. The voice was secure, the timing exact, the wit effortless, and the young woman once told that she did not resemble a star now commanded one of the largest gatherings of her career. But the fear had already begun elsewhere. Decades later, Barbra explained that her anxiety about forgetting lines had taken root during the Broadway run of Funny Girl, where the behavior of a fellow performer repeatedly disrupted her concentration. "I never lost that fear of performing, fear of forgetting my lines," she admitted. Central Park gave that fear its most public confirmation. During the concert, the lyrics suddenly escaped her. The audience remained. The musicians continued. The camera preserved the evening. Yet inside the performer, one moment of uncertainty became far larger than the seconds in which it occurred. The woman whose voice appeared capable of holding an entire park began to doubt whether she could trust herself when there was no second take. She continued recording, acting, and creating, and she did not disappear from public life. But for nearly 3 decades, she largely avoided the kind of major-ticketed concert in which every word had to arrive correctly before thousands of waiting faces. That distinction matters. She had not lost her voice. She had lost the feeling that the open stage was safe. Film offered another rhythm. A scene could be examined, repeated, reframed, and protected through preparation. In the recording studio, a phrase could be refined until the emotion and sound met exactly where she wanted them to meet. What looked from outside like relentless control was also a woman building conditions in which fear could no longer take everything from her. The stage had first given Barbra a way out of Brooklyn. Central Park revealed that applause could not guarantee safety. Rather than surrender her creative life, she redirected it. Through the 1970s, the singer who feared the unpredictability of live performance became increasingly determined to shape not only the sound audiences heard, but the image, story, and meaning surrounding it. The 1970s placed Barbra Streisand inside the private memory of a generation. Her records turned in living rooms after children had gone to bed. Her films played in dark theaters beside first loves, troubled marriages, and people who would later remember the song more clearly than the conversation they had after it. In 1973, The Way We Were paired her with Robert Redford and gave American cinema a love story whose pain came from the fact that affection could be real while two lives remained unable to move in the same direction. As Katie Morosky, Barbra embodied a woman who was passionate, political, intelligent, emotionally unguarded, and repeatedly treated as excessive because she refused to become convenient. The role carried echoes of Barbra's own public struggle, though Katie was never simply a disguised self-portrait. What joined them was the refusal to reduce intensity in order to make other people comfortable. 3 years later, A Star Is Born expanded Barbra's authority beyond performance. She wrote the music for Evergreen with lyrics by Paul Williams, and the song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1977, making her the first woman to receive an Oscar for composing music. She was no longer only the person interpreting emotion after others had created its structure. She was helping build the structure itself. The achievement clarified what her career had been moving toward: authorship. Barbra wanted to understand the lens, the arrangement, the edit, the production decision, and the final relationship between an image and the person the image claimed to represent. That desire was often described as excessive control, yet it had grown inside an industry that had spent years judging her appearance, narrowing her possibilities, and asking her to trust other people with the meaning of her own face and voice. The project that gathered all of those struggles into one story had first captured her attention in 1963. It concerned a young Jewish woman forbidden to pursue the learning she desired, who altered how the world saw her so she could enter a room closed to women. Barbra held on to the story through years of refusal and delay. Nearly 2 decades later, she would become the first woman in Hollywood history to write, produce, direct, and star in a major studio film. The girl once asked to remain inside other people's frames was preparing to build the frame herself. The title was Yentl. Barbra Streisand's demand for authorship faced its hardest test in Yentl. She had been drawn for years to the story of a young Jewish woman who disguises herself to enter a world of religious learning reserved for men. Barbra understood the hunger beneath that disguise, the experience of approaching a room already judged by her sex, appearance, and an ambition others considered excessive in a woman. Yentl became more than a film she hoped to make. It was a denied room reconstructed through her own judgment, music, camera, and persistence. For roughly 15 years, the project repeatedly moved toward production and threatened to collapse. Studios considered it unusual, strongly Jewish, difficult to market, and risky for an actress who also intended to direct. Barbra later summarized the resistance plainly. "Every studio turned me down. Hollywood already trusted her to sing, act, sell tickets, and carry a film in front of the camera. The resistance intensified when she asked to shape the entire work, to guide the performances, music, tone, budget, and meaning. Stardom was acceptable while someone else retained the final frame. Directing placed that authority in Barbra's hands. Each rejection sent her back to the material without any promise that persistence would save the project, rather than simply prolong its failure. Yet the struggle to make the film began to mirror its central story. A woman changing the terms of how she was seen, so she could enter a world that insisted she did not belong. When Yentl finally reached audiences in 1983, Barbra was 41 and already one of America's most decorated entertainers. She wrote, produced, directed, and starred in the film, carrying its emotional center while protecting the vision she had fought years to preserve. The Golden Globes honored Yentl as Best Motion Picture, Musical or Comedy, and named Barbra Best Director, making her the first woman to win that directing prize. The Academy responded less fully. Yentl received 5 Oscar nominations, but Barbra was absent from the Best Director category. Hollywood recognized pieces of the achievement while hesitating to honor the woman who had unified them. The omission touched an argument that had followed her throughout her career. As a young performer, she had been told her face did not fit the image of a leading lady. As an established star, she encountered another boundary. The industry accepted her visibility more easily than her authority. Still, Yentl could not be reduced to the nomination she did not receive. The completed film preserved every year she refused to let the project disappear, and every decision that placed a woman's intellectual hunger at the center of a major production. Barbra had not waited for the room to admit she belonged. She built it through her own vision. Her directing life was not finished, and Hollywood would again celebrate a film she shaped while hesitating to honor the woman behind it. Yentl had proved that Barbra Streisand could direct a film built around music, identity, and a woman fighting her way into a forbidden world. The Prince of Tides asked a harder question. Would Hollywood recognize the same authority when the songs disappeared and the camera turned toward family damage, buried memory, and the emotional cost of survival? In 1991, Barbra directed the adaptation of Pat Conroy's sweeping novel as a serious drama rather than a vehicle for the voice that had first made her famous. The film followed adults still negotiating injuries received in childhood, people who had learned to function while carrying histories they could barely name. Her own life had already taught her that success never seals the past behind a locked door. A person can win awards, build a home, raise a child, and still discover that old absences continue shaping the present. Barbra guided the film with polished emotional control, giving silence, memory, and restrained confession as much weight as dialogue. Nick Nolte delivered one of the most acclaimed performances of his career, and the film entered the Academy Awards with 7 nominations, including Best Picture and Best Actor. On paper, the recognition looked like a major triumph. Yet Barbra's name was absent from the Best Director category. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. A film had been judged worthy of standing among the year's best, while the woman responsible for shaping its performances, tone, rhythm, and emotional structure remained outside the directing race. Billy Crystal, hosting the ceremony, turned the omission into a musical joke by asking whether The Prince of Tides had directed itself. The audience laughed because the question exposed what the nominations had tried to leave unexplained. Barbra had already spent years hearing that her attention to lighting, editing, music, and performance made her difficult. Now the Academy admired the result while withholding recognition from the authority behind it. The wound was quieter than the panic of Central Park and less visible than the long fight to make Yentl, but it reached the same place. She had once been told that her face did not belong at the center of the screen. Later, the work she directed was welcomed into the room, while her leadership was treated as optional. She spoke about the disappointment without allowing it to become the final meaning of the film. A category could overlook her. It could not remove the choices preserved in every frame. By the early 1990s, Barbra had already lived as a fatherless daughter, nightclub outsider, Broadway phenomenon, Oscar-winning actress, mother, divorced woman, singer living with stage fear, and filmmaker who had forced open a position Hollywood rarely granted women. The public knew the legend, and the industry knew the force required to sustain it. What her life had offered less often was a relationship in which she did not have to arrive as either. That change entered quietly in 1996 through a blind date with James Brolin. Barbra was in her 50s, carrying decades of public praise, mockery, imitation, scrutiny, artistic battle, and the exhausting expectation that she should always be as commanding in private as she appeared beneath the lights. Her Malibu home had become more than an elegant property. It represented a boundary around the hours when the performer was no longer required to remain available. James entered her life as an established actor with his own history, children, professional identity, and understanding of what fame could distort. Their first meeting has often been remembered through Barbra's immediate comment about his haircut. The detail matters because she did not soften herself into a more agreeable version for the occasion. She was direct, amused, observant, and unwilling to pretend. James did not appear threatened by the candor. Their connection developed between two adults who had already experienced marriage, career pressure, disappointment, and the difference between public charm and private steadiness. They married in 1998 at her Malibu home and created a blended family life that endured beyond the temporary excitement usually attached to Hollywood romance. The emotional value of this chapter lies in its contrast with the years that came earlier. Barbra had spent much of her career entering rooms prepared to defend her face, voice, judgment, and right to control the work attached to her name. With James, she seemed to find a relationship that did not require another argument proving why she belonged there. He knew the public figure and remained connected to the person whose days continued after the performance ended. Their marriage should not be polished into a fantasy untouched by effort. Two strong personalities do not remain together for decades through admiration alone. Longevity requires adjustment, humor, privacy, and the repeated decision to protect a life that audiences cannot fully see. For Barbra, being loved later in life did not mean becoming softer, quieter, or easier to manage. It meant being known without having every sharp edge treated as a problem to solve. The Malibu home became the physical center of that protected world, a place shaped with unusual care, filled with objects, color, memory, and choices that belonged to her rather than to a studio. Yet the very sanctuary that represented the limit of public access would soon place her name inside a new cultural vocabulary. The next struggle would involve no director, record executive, critic, or awards committee. It would begin with a distant photograph and a medium that multiplied attention faster than any old Hollywood publicity machine could control. In 2003, a photograph of Barbra Streisand's Malibu home appeared within a large project documenting the California coastline. To the photographer, the image belonged to an environmental record containing thousands of coastal properties. To Barbra, the house represented something far more personal, the boundary between the life audiences were invited to observe and the life that remained hers when the cameras stopped. A home is not simply another exterior in the biography of a celebrity. It is where a performer's voice can rest, where family relationships continue without narration, and where a public figure expects the right to become unavailable. Barbra took legal action in an effort to restrict circulation of the photograph. The attempt produced the opposite result. People who had never known the image existed began searching for it. News coverage expanded. Curiosity became traffic. The photograph acquired cultural significance precisely because someone famous wanted the attention reduced. The phrase Streisand effect eventually became shorthand for a recurring fact of internet life. Efforts to suppress information can generate the publicity they were meant to prevent. The term is often delivered as a joke, as though the entire episode were only an example of celebrity miscalculation. Inside Barbra's life, the irony carried more weight. She had spent decades learning how to negotiate the systems that shaped her image. She could question a camera angle, challenge a musical arrangement, examine a contract, or refuse a version of herself she believed was false. The internet offered no single office in which to argue and no final editor capable of stopping duplication. Once attention began spreading, every attempt to narrow it became part of the story. The episode marked a collision between two eras of fame. Old Hollywood concentrated power in studios, television networks, newspapers, and magazines. The emerging digital culture distributed that power across websites, links, searches, copies, and strangers acting without a shared gatekeeper. Barbra's effort to defend her home became permanently associated with the difficulty of defending any boundary once information enters that system. The deeper point is not that she was wrong to care about privacy or foolish to protect a sanctuary. It is that the meaning of privacy had changed around her. A woman who had spent her life fighting to control the frame now faced a medium with no stable frame at all. The world had turned even the wish to remain unseen into another form of visibility. At 84, Barbra Streisand had reached an age that deserved tenderness rather than pity. In 2025, The Secret of Life Partners, Volume 2 returned her to listeners through a new collection of duets. Time had deepened the instrument, but the qualities that made it unmistakably hers remained. Precise phrasing, intelligence, humor, and the ability to make a familiar lyric feel personally lived. The following year, the Cannes Film Festival named her an honorary Palme d'Or recipient, recognizing a career that had crossed acting, music, writing, producing, composing, and directing. Recovering from a knee injury, Barbra followed medical advice and remained at home, while Isabelle Huppert presented the tribute at her request. An ocean separated her from the ceremony, yet her absence could not diminish the occasion. The woman who had once spent years proving that she deserved creative authority was now being honored for changing the possibilities of cinema itself. The dimensions of that achievement can be counted in Academy Awards, Grammy Awards, historic albums, Broadway performances, television specials, major films, and directorial milestones. Its emotional meaning is harder to measure. Barbra gave audiences women who were passionate, complicated, funny, demanding, lonely, and unwilling to become convenient. She brought those qualities to Fanny Brice, Katie Morosky, Esther Hoffman, Yentl, and to songs that reach listeners during love, separation, regret, and renewal. Her own journey carried private costs, a young marriage ending beneath the pressure of fame, motherhood lived under public scrutiny, years of anxiety around live performance, and a lifelong need to protect parts of herself from an audience that always wanted more. None of those chapters reduced her achievement, and success never erased their weight. Together, they reveal an artist whose authority grew from discipline, vulnerability, and an insistence on shaping her work according to her own understanding. For older American viewers, Barbra's legacy is inseparable from personal memory. People, The Way We Were, an evergreen, may recall a record turning late at night, a drive beside someone once loved, or a theater seat remembered because the person beside it is gone. Her songs endured because listeners placed their own lives inside them. That may be the deepest measure of her influence. She created work spacious enough to hold experiences that audiences had not yet found words to express. She also widened the path for women who wanted more than visibility, women who wanted authorship, budgets, cameras, and the right to decide what a story meant. The Brooklyn girl, once judged by standards she did not create, became an artist who helped change those standards. Decades later, fashions have passed, bodies have aged, and generations have changed, yet the connection remains. If Barbra Streisand's music or films have become part of your own history, leave a tribute below. Tell us the song, the scene, or the memory that returns when you hear her name, and let us honor her while she is still here to receive it.